Tyra. The verse is John 1:1. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God.
Thanks again so much for being with us. What a beautiful gift that you gave us. Can we just say one more quick thanks to this group? Had to come up wiping both eyes from tears, and I love seeing Thomas in teacher mode. It's great to witness that event. I'm going to ask you a question. My name is Jarod Osborne. I serve as the lead pastor here. If we haven't met, welcome. Really glad you're here. The question I'm going to ask you, if you're sitting next to an elementary school student, you might want to cover their ears. Question is this: when did you stop believing in Santa Claus? Don't grimace at me and scowl. By the time I was about 6, I had a pretty good handle on the way Christmas worked, as I know some of you do or have for many, many years. I would go with my dad. We'd set out the cookies and the milk on Christmas Eve, and we'd set them in a prominent place near wherever the most likely point of entry was for Santa. And, well, we had a fireplace. So near the fireplace, we'd set that out. And sometimes if we were in a generous spirit, we'd leave some carrots, too, for whichever reindeer needed it the most. And then we would go to bed. My sister and I would go to bed. We didn't necessarily sleep early, but we'd go to bed early enough so that we wouldn't spoil Santa's arrival. And then we'd wait eagerly all night. By the time we finally fell asleep, it was late. And you know, little kids, they don't sleep in often on Christmas morning. So we were up before dawn, couldn't figure out why my parents wanted to sleep any longer than they had to on Christmas morning. So we'd wake them up, or sometimes we'd just skip that part and ran into the living room where the fireplace was, noticing most of the cookies were eaten, a little bit of crumbs were still there, most of the milk was drank, and the carrots were gone. To find all of these gifts, I don't know how many there were. Looking back as a kid, you know, it seemed like a great event. And one of those gifts in particular, usually the last one or the best one, had a tag on it, and it was wrapped a little differently. It was wrapped a little more elaborately, and it said, "From Santa." That was our Santa gift. Some kids have a sort of Santa faith crisis when they hit upper elementary school. You know what I mean? They'll go to school one day having always believed in Santa Claus, and then something will happen on the playground, and someone will say something that will just rock their world. And on the way home, there's that heated car conversation. "Mom, Aiden told me that there's no such thing as a Santa. Is that true?" Now, if you're a parent, maybe you've hit this moment in your own internal wrestlings where you got to ask yourself, well, gee, what is exactly technically lying? What can I say here in those moments? If you're not prepared for it, you might want to think it through, because that moment will hit you unexpectedly. And you'll think, should I tell him now, or should I hold out the subterfuge another year, and will it be a harder letdown a year from now? What do I say? Some kids have a crash. I don't remember a time where I ever stopped particularly believing in Santa. I don't remember a day where I started disbelieving in Santa. It just sort of, I grew out of it. Not that I turned a corner, it's just that it changed for me. Studies say that 7 out of 10 kids under the age of 10 believe in Santa. They stop believing in Santa somewhere around the age of 9, average, or 10. But what's interesting is, for adults, of all the adults who don't have kids in their home, 1 out of 5 of those adults expect a visit from Santa this Christmas. They don't really think that's going to happen, but they expect some of the ritual to happen. They're going to go through setting out the cookies. They are going to bake it the night before. They're going to set out the glass of milk, and maybe one or the other adult in the house is going to drink half of it. They're going to have some sort of special Santa gift. They're going to do something to bring that tradition alive in their adult home without kids. In other words, they're going to pretend. Adults mostly will set up trees this year, or have already. 79% of adults will put up a Christmas tree in their house. It's kind of a funny tradition if you think about it from the outside, but we do it all the time. 86% of adults will give gifts to friends or family this year. Only about half, 55% of adults will attend any kind of religious service on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Here's my hunch. For many people, the drifting perspective of Santa Claus is just about the same as their perspective on Jesus. Here's what I mean. Most people would say, like St. Nick, they are in favor of Jesus. They believe that he was a real person, historical figure. They believe that he was generous and kind to children, especially, and those in need. They believe he gave good gifts. They would say that they value the spirit of Christ, the value system of Christ, the culture of the whole thing. They want to emulate that. They want to reproduce that in some way and bring that into the world, that this was a good thing, what Christ did, just like what Santa Claus represents. This is a good thing that we need to imitate and bring back. But if you peel back the layers and pull away the curtain, behind the scenes, there's nothing really mysterious or magical about it. It's all just human effort. That what is done by mom and dad. That there's really no Jesus somewhere moving into our lives and giving gifts, at least not in any way directly. That everything that happens is happening from somebody else's effort. That 86% of adults would say they believe in the Christmas story, that Jesus was born of a virgin named Mary, that he was laid in a manger, that he was visited by shepherds and magi. But very few of those people would say that in any way they expect to bump into him, to encounter him this Christmas. We like the atmosphere. So we pretend. I want to introduce you again to the writer named John, who tells a different kind of Christmas story than most of us are familiar with. In John chapter 1, you heard his introduction. This is the start of the book about his life, about his story about Jesus' life. It says, in the beginning, very first words, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, everything was made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And then listen to this part. The Word became flesh and lived among us. Last week I shared with you that of the four people that wrote stories of Jesus' life, Matthew and Luke had a genealogy in the beginning. They did some background tracking of the family line of Jesus because they wanted us to know. Matthew tied it all the way back through King David and then said Jesus is not only a descendant of King David, he's a descendant of Abraham because he's a true Jew. He's a child of the promise. Luke goes even farther back and says, we tie Jesus' genealogy all the way back to Adam because he's a blessing to the whole world. He has repercussions for every human being. But John does something so different, it's almost shocking to the system. John says, here's the first person, and here's when the world was made in the beginning. But in the beginning, Jesus already was. He was already there. And he takes us at the very edge of our comprehension at the very first sentence of his gospel. And he makes us gaze into the mystery and into the wonder of what was before what we know came to be. In the beginning, Jesus was already there, but he doesn't call him by name. He says, in the beginning was the Word. In this galactic space that we live in, and we are just a tiny, tiny dot, an imperceptible little planet spinning in a galaxy among, scientists estimate, about 2 trillion other galaxies, each with billions of stars in them, in which we don't even show up to scale. Our whole planet is invisible to scale of the universe. John wants us to think this is what Jesus made. So imagine the biggest thing you can think of in Jesus is far beyond that scale. Imagine the strongest or most powerful or most long enduring thing you can think of, and then Jesus made that. Please don't mistake the closeness and the familiarity of the child at Christmas story for where he came from, for who he really is, but there's more than that. There's more than that, and there's something else that we must catch from the beginning, and it has to do with music. I first came across this idea in Chinese, actually, in the Chinese language, and then became curious about it. It translates into English as music of the spheres, or music of the planets, or music of the universe. It comes from the Latin musica universalis. It's an idea based on a Pythagorean concept where he said the planets, all that stuff that we see out there in orbit, it must generate some sort of tone. And based on his scientific calculations, he imagined that the universe was creating its own sense of music. To put it a little bit more poetically, the planets and the stars are God's cosmic orchestra. Interesting thought, isn't it? Because on a really clear night, if you're standing by yourself and looking at the stars, you can't hear anything. The more alone you get, the farther away from Earth you get, seems like the quieter and quieter it would be. So people have mused about this idea of the orchestra of the cosmos, but only recently has NASA been able to put ears into space and capture what Pythagoras theorized. Do you want to hear what a star sounds like from a distant galaxy? Audio files are 2 different stars playing their tunes in the universe. Isn't that interesting? But that's just a glimpse into deep space, which draws our mind into deep heaven. See, this is actually not a new concept. That there is music beyond our sphere that's coming to us from beyond. I used to be really afraid. It might be a strange twist on the fear of death, but I used to be afraid that after you die, you go to funerals and you watch people be put in a box and be put in the ground. And I was just nervous that it was so quiet. I suppose there's a lot of other things to be nervous about when you think about dying, but I was so nervous that it would be so quiet, silent. And it was the silence that was so lonely. But it's not true. The farther out you get, it's actually quite noisy. And beyond the physical space of the universe and its expansion into the realm of God, it's actually much, much noisier. And this is also captured in the Christmas story. When Jesus was born, his announcement was made by angels, by traveling choirs of heaven. Think about this. A choir came and made a cosmic announcement from heaven to earth, singing news that the Word eternal, this one that made everything that is visiting your planet, is coming in the form of you. And so Jesus came, walked, ate, talked with them in their language, in their accent, in their colloquialisms. The word is out there, and he is speaking to you. It's such a sad feeling if you think about writing a letter to Santa Claus and sharing what's on your heart, and where do you send that letter? Sometimes it feels like you just, you give it to your parents, and where does it go? It's like that goes into oblivion. It goes into space, and sometimes we feel that way when we pray. If we're in a closed room, if we're in a closed conversation in our head, and we want to shoot some sort of message out to God and say, listen, this is where I am. This is what's on my heart. This is what's going on. And sometimes it feels like that just kind of gets lost in space. Where does it go? Am I hearing back? I want you to know this is not a one-way conversation that floats into oblivion. The word is coming from out there to here. God is speaking to you. How is God speaking to you lately? In your point of need, in the inner thoughts and the lower levels of your subconscious that you don't often talk about with anybody, but if you quieted down a moment, you know are there. How is God speaking to you lately? When Jesus spoke to people, he had this way of totally unimpressing them. When he spoke to people, he spoke to them in a way that challenged them inside, and it was so familiar that they almost couldn't hear it, but it was so challenging they almost couldn't receive it. But it was so hopeful they didn't know what to do with it. How is God speaking to you? And if he speaks, are you willing to actually hear it at the frequency it's being delivered? I want to tell you a story and illustrate it. In the Old Testament, there's a really famous story in the Bible about Moses, and he sees a burning bush. We'll use this prop, and it kind of fits the profile. So I actually didn't recognize this until just a minute ago that we have a live prop here. It's a burning bush. So there's a bush that's on fire, and Moses approaches this, and he's told to take off his shoes, and then he has this conversation with God. And God sends him on a great mission and a great quest, and before he goes, Moses says, wait, I need to tell them who sent me. What do we call you? What is your name? And God reveals to Moses his name. And he says, the divine name which Moses delivered when they asked, who sent you? And the Jews from Moses and maybe pre-Moses, but this time onward, they took this name that was revealed and they considered it so sacred they wouldn't even say it. When they wrote it wrongly, and they omitted the vowels so you can't pronounce it. And they would create like side words to describe the name, but the name of God, this great one who made heaven and earth, who revealed himself to Moses, was too transcendent, too great to speak his name. And so when people talked about Yahweh, they talked about him around. You could say they beat around the bush. When Moses spoke with God, he would go up on a mountain. And it wasn't just because the people weren't allowed up to go speak to God. They would not go speak to God because they were terrified of having a conversation with God because they knew who he was. So they said, you go away. We won't even approach the foothills of the mountain. This is the reverence with which they held the name of God, the communication of God, which was so sacred they dare not put it in their human, filthy hot breath mouth and say his name. Now I want you to think about that and then put the Christmas story into it, where an angel comes from heaven and tells ordinary people that Jesus, the eternal Word, the Son of God, God's very own self-same representative, is coming to your town today, and his name is Jesus. Now that doesn't hit you and me, but that is a dramatic disappointment to everybody else. Jesus was a pretty common name. Like, there would have been a lot of other Jesuses in his school. That would be like you going home today, flipping on the news, and you see on all the major broadcast channels, breaking news. And so reporters are flocking to a rural town in Kentucky, and they are saying, we've just got word from a reliable source that God is sending his own representative, a member of his own family of God, is coming to earth to deliver a message. We want to be here to catch it. So all the news crews are blasting this, and they go into a local diner trying to find out where God had landed, and they see a guy in jeans and a t-shirt who walks up to the cameras, and over all the world is broadcast, and he walks up and goes, "Hi, my name's Steve. I'm the son of God." No, you're not. No, really. Where is he? Because we've been listening, and if God would speak to me, he certainly wouldn't speak to me in an accent. He certainly wouldn't speak to me in English. He certainly wouldn't speak to me in such a mundane, simple way, and he certainly wouldn't be this close. Come on, God, impress me. I'm listening out there. That's not the way Jesus speaks. Not mostly. Michael and Mary took a walk on a, true story, blue, beautiful Melbourne sky day in Melbourne. And as they were walking and looking at the clouds, you ever play that cloud watching game where you look and see if you can find shapes in the clouds, or see if you can make out like a giant turtle or a dragon eating a snake or something, whatever you find in the clouds, or maybe words. Well, as Michael and his girlfriend Mary were walking down, and she looked up at the clouds and she realized there was a message in the sky from her. It was her name written in the clouds. And it said, "Mary, marry me." And then she realized, looking up at the clouds, well, that's my name. That's my, whoa! And Michael's standing right beside her, and he drops to one knee. And this cosmic message in the clouds all of a sudden had her name on it, and she realized right beside her was this great invitation into a lifelong relationship. Unfortunately, Michael spent $4,000 on the proposal, and she said no. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Because at some point, Jesus, who for many of us has moved from man into mythology, that we pretend and keep the spirit of Christmas alive, but the personal conversation with Christ has been long since dead. The moment when we look up and see something or hear something or recognize something resounding in our life, and we realize this has my name on it, this has God's print on it for me. This is not just a general word spoken. This is the word of God spoken to me, and he's actually much closer than I thought. And he's conversating with me. He's opening up a lifelong communication, a relationship that he wants me to be involved in. This is how close God is to you. This is the way that he's speaking to you. But my question is, will you hear it? And how will you respond? The prayers are not unheard. We might just not be listening in on the right frequency, because I believe that God can speak to you through things so simple as a pastor a friend, a coworker, a classmate, a Bible, an impression, a song, a starry sky, a Christmas gift, a moving thought, a deep friendship. And he's for you. And let me tell you what he's telling you. He's telling you, I love you. I know you by name. I want you. He's not inviting us into a Christmas ritual. He's inviting us into a relationship. I'm going to pray. And as I pray, I just want you to pray with me. I might try to put some words that might give some shape to what you're thinking. And if I say something that's similar to what you're thinking, you can just kind of agree with me in your mind and pray that kind of thought with me. Jesus, most Christmas recreations start with the manger. But in John, we start with the cosmos and beyond. We start with this eternal word. And then we come really, really close to home where you speak to us by name, almost embarrassingly close. And that all of these reasons that we sing are actually because there's really good news, that because each one of us is loved by God, that our story is not being written and then fading into silence, that it's not just us that's speaking and singing, but we're actually just replaying things that take place in heaven and have come down to earth, that you sing over us, that you speak to us. Jesus, if I could be so bold as to ask, I would ask that each person in this room hear you. That we wouldn't spend another day, another year, another season dealing in myth when you're closer to us than that. When your Spirit is following us step by step in love, offering invitation after invitation, when you want to give us gifts that would set us free from a life without you. Jesus, when you speak to us, help us hear what you're saying and not just what we're wanting, that you love us, that you want a good life for us, the kind of life we were meant to have, that you want to know us and you want us to know you, that you want us to walk in a way that would bring true life. Jesus, for those who are here and the conversation has been radio silence for far too long, just ask that you would speak, that your Spirit would speak to them in some way they would hear it. And for those who may have been ignoring or tuning you out, even the heavens sing and play the glory of God, quite literally. The music of the spheres is on their ears. I pray that they would hear you and that they would respond. That they would open up with another chance. Lord, I know so many have heard so many screams and so many cutting words from people around them. They just don't want to hear anything else. It's easier to tune it all out, but God, not from you. I pray that they would open up a conversation again. So we can do a lot of things, but nothing really has meaning unless we have the conversation we were meant to have with you. Thank you for spanning the distance of heaven and speaking to us, Jesus, in a language that we can understand. It's in your name that we